Hi, I'm Villain Theory and welcome to the video. Today we're talking about Cable. Hope you guys are all enjoying Next Evolution. I definitely am. And yeah, Cable has surprised me in a lot of ways, so I'm very excited to talk about him. Um, I'm not going to go through every card in, exact detail. This isn't sort of a guide to playing him. It's not, a deep look at every card. Kind of an overall review of my experience with him. And if you can see the screen here, if you've seen my previous video, you'll recognize it from my tier list. We're going to go through each of these categories and, give them a rating out of 5 stars, including 2 new ones. Because the tier list was for power. And I think what's more important with a actual hero in terms of playing them is how much do you enjoy them. So I've added in variety and fun factor. I think fun factor speaks, for itself. How enjoyable is the hero? This is definitely, going to differ from person to person. So that's very personal to me. Whereas I feel like the other ones, yeah, it's my opinion on them, but it's kind of how I feel they are going to be for, most people. And variety is kind of, how fresh is each deck going to feel for him, or is it going to feel the same no matter what? Um, so yeah, I think we'll jump into it. 2 in every stat, very reliable. His response readies him when he defeats a side scheme, and I should probably mention here, um, there's a new player card type in Next Evolution called Player Side Schemes. Now, these are cards which just go in your deck like normal. Um, you pay for them, they go into play, but they go into play like a normal, villain, side scheme. Um, but they don't have anything negative on them for the most part. And you get a reward when you defeat them. So they're kind of an alternative way to use your forwarding. So you can get like some extra benefits, things like that. Very cool. The rulebook frames them all as missions. So, Cable is all about going on these missions, these player side schemes. He's got this special deck building bonus where he can include side schemes from any aspect. So, getting all these missions lined up for Cable to go on as a soldier, which I think is really cool, and I've really enjoyed it. Has been interesting to try and detangle the fun of player side schemes from the fun of Cable, but I think side schemes are inherently fun, and Cable uses them the most of anyone, so I don't think it matters too much. But yeah, side schemes for players are really cool. And his setup ability to find one from your deck or discard pile, which is, the timing is after, you draw your hand of cards and mulligan. I think that choice is one of the most in-depth and meaningful choices you'll ever make in Marvel Champions. And, once the game has, kind of begun. Really, really cool. A lot of different options there that vary depending on, your deck, the villain, what other players that might be with you. This is also probably a good time to mention I've only played him 1 and 2 player. Now, I got the expansion a few days early. I've played him, I'd say, quite a bit. But yeah, no actual practical 3 and 4 player experience. So, if that's your main player count, try and take everything I say with an extra pinch of salt. But yeah, full recovery, all very good here. But the only problem I really have is after the game has actually started and you finish the setup ability, his alter ego is kind of just blank. He's got nothing he can use when he flips down, unless, it's other cards which you put into play. Gambit is one of the, previous heroes that was just released. And his alter ego was fantastic. So this definitely stings a little bit. I was, kind of hoping for more. But still really, really cool. People like readying. He readies after he defeats a side scheme. I definitely like that. So yeah, I like the identity cards for the most part. And what I think we need to talk about next are these side schemes themselves. We've received, I think, 6, and he's got his own signature side scheme, so we're going to talk about those. And these are what I'm calling the starter side schemes. These are the 3 that I think most people are going to want to get in play first. The first one is his signature side scheme, Technovirus Purge. Comes with a flat value of 5 threat, no matter the player count. If he catches, only Cable can remove threat from it, so your allies can't, other players can't. Supports can, because they don't count as characters. But upgrades and events and your basic forwarding are basically the only other things which can contribute to this. So this is a bit of a tricky one. If you don't draw your signature forwarding card, or you're not playing maybe Justice, or taking one of the rare threat removal cards in the other aspects, this can just be difficult to start with and then get rid of immediately, which means you miss out on your ready on turn 1. Things get kind of stuck. All these player side schemes go into the victory display, and what that does is power up a lot of Cable's cards. So you need to start doing that early, because it can take a while to get enough player side schemes to really make, a meaningful difference with his cards. So I don't actually normally start with Technovirus Purge. I think this is a bit of a trap. I think this is kind of the, it sounds good on paper, but in reality, it is quite hard sometimes to find that 5 threat removal on turn 1. And even if you do, it's going to be quite a lot of investment. You probably could have played something else, another upgrade, that kind of thing. And yeah, outside of Justice, I think it's pretty tricky in particular. So I actually don't recommend starting with Technovirus Purge most of the time. It does boost your stats, so any decks that really like bigger stats are going to like it. It also gives you the Psionic trait, so Psionic decks are going to like it. But yeah, getting this out and not getting rid of it for a turn or two is bad news. What I do like to start with is build support. Cable has a 2-cost, it's a support. It's a really good resource generator. It's called Greymalkin. It readies when you defeat a player side scheme. We're going to cover it again in a little bit, but basically, if you get build support defeated on turn 1, you're going to be able to generate, an extra 1 to 2 resources every turn. So I think it's very reliable, and only 3 threat compared to 5, a lot easier to defeat. Really, really like this card. And in multiplayer, you can start to do some awesome things with this. Something we've done is, the other deck has a helicarrier in it. Now, of course, in 2-player, this will come in with double the threat. It's free per person. But then maybe they'll help chip it down 1 or 2. Highest Cable then finish it off. We both get a support. They will get a helicarrier, which they can then use, even though it's now my turn. Yeah, really, really good card. And then we've got Call for Backup, which gets an ally for free. And whereas Build Support is limited to a support with a cost of 3 or less, Call for Backup has no such limit. Call for Backup, if you've got a 6-cost Hercules in your deck, you can just get your 6-cost Hercules after defeating Call for Backup, which is ridiculous. Some allies I really like for this are Wolverine, Psylocke, Dazzler. There's so many in leadership, but I think Phantomex is very interesting because he's a new ally that comes in with a support that can help you remove threat. But also Beta Ray Bill, very, very good. Protection has multiple man, Iron Fist, very cool. But one of my favorites is just from Basic, which is Nick Fury. If you start with Call for Backup, defeat it, you can get yourself a Nick Fury on turn 1, who's going to draw you 3 more cards probably, and that means you're going to find more upgrades or other side schemes, and you can accelerate Cable's slow setup by getting more cards in play. And Nick Fury is going to block for you, he's going to do something on the board as well, so in addition to the card draw, he is still doing some kind of regular ally stuff. So Call for Backup's really interesting. The way I see these is Call for Backup is kind of short-term gain, but it can, especially if you've got other good upgrades in hand you want to try and pay for, can accelerate setup for the long game, so it is interesting. Build support just gets you your Greymalkin support resource generator, so I mean that is phenomenal. Technovirus Purge I think is a bit of a trap, partially because of the obligation that Cable has, Technovirus Resurgence, which when that comes up, if Technovirus Purge has been defeated and put into the victory display, Technovirus Resurgence puts it back into play with an acceleration token, which is pretty nasty, especially if you've dedicated, a lot of your opening turn to it, and you get this early on, it's really, really going to set you back, especially if you've got a Psionic, card-based deck, which is tricky. But overall, really cool options here. I really like these. I think most games will start with one of these, especially at solo. At 2-player, at the bottom right here, we have Superpower Training, which I think is another strong option. Cable doesn't have any, I would say, upgrades that are super, super essential to, try and get out turn 1, to put this over the other options we've looked at, but other players might, and if other players do have, Ant-Man's helmet, things like that, making sure they can get that early is going to be vital. I would say Cable's best upgrade is Plasma Rifle, which we're going to look at soon. And what's really cool as a weapon and an upgrade, both Lock and Load here and Superpower Training can find it. So you can do some interesting things, depending on which one of these you find first. You can use either of them to get that Plasma Rifle in play. And in solo play especially, I found that very, 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 very useful. Established Perimeter is good. Both Established Perimeter and Lock and Load have 2 threat per person, which makes them a lot easier to remove. Lock and Load, not so good if, multiplayer and your other players don't have weapons. So but in solo play, I'm always taking it, and I'm usually taking a second weapon in addition to the Plasma Rifle Cable gets, just to make sure it can hit something if Plasma Rifle is already in play. And Plasma Rifle is one of those cards that powers up as, you get side schemes into the victory display. Sometimes on turn 1, if I don't have any threat removal, in my hand for whatever reason, you can get unlucky and not find any extra. Uh, Sometimes I'll just go for one of the 2 threat per person cards, make sure I can clear it on turn 1. But, if I've only got one side scheme in the victory display, plasma rifle isn't doing much damage, I might prefer to grab, say, sonic rifle or hand cannon. Um, so you've got kind of interesting choices to make there as well. And that also, if you don't have other threat removal, to make sure you can defeat one of these other cards on turn 1. Lock and load, and then, establish perimeter, I would say, in multiplayer, if someone else doesn't have a weapon, also become, valid starting choices. So all 6 of these cards are very interesting. I think they did a really good job with the player side schemes and how they interact with Cable. The last one is take out the guards. It's 0 cost, which is, equal in cheapness to his signature side scheme, joint cheapest, but it takes 4 threat per person to remove. And what it does is discard a minion in play. So where the other side schemes are really reliable, you're always going to get a bonus. For this one, you need an equal amount of minions to the players to really get full value. And the problem is with Cable, especially in these lower player counts, which I've mostly played and I'm talking about, I'm putting down a side scheme and I'm wanting to defeat it immediately to try and start to power up. There's no minion in play. What do? Do I just, sink 4 threat removal into this and not get the when defeated bonus? Or do I leave it out and stop myself defeating it, slow down? Maybe block myself putting other side schemes out. I should mention in 1 and 2 player, you can only have 1 player side scheme out at a time. And in 3 and 4, you can have 2 player side schemes out at a time. So yeah, this one is a card I would say is situational, depending on the scenario. Minion heavy scenarios, or scenarios with a lot of minions that have really nasty, when defeated effects. This card doesn't actually defeat the minion; it discards them. So you can do some good stuff with it, but this is more of a tech card for certain situations, in my opinion, in my experience with Cable. And then we have what's not out yet, but I think is going to be very relevant and so is worth talking about, is specialized training. This has been officially previewed with X23 when she comes out. Super cool card. What you do is you set the all these upgrades below aside at the start of the game, kind of thing. And then once you defeat specialized training, you get to look at those set aside upgrades and choose one to come into play. And basically, they break down to +1 to a stat and card draw every turn, which is very, very good. There's a plus hit point one, which has some issues, and Cable definitely with 12 hit points isn't really looking for that anyway, in my opinion. But yeah, the threat removal one or the damage one, I think, are both going to be great for him. In solo play, you can often just remove a side scheme with a forwarding card. So you can do something like attack with the +1, use a forwarding card to defeat a side scheme, ready up because it was, Cable playing the event, you get the ready, then you can attack again with +1. So even if you're playing something like Justice or Protection, you can start to get really good damage from Combat Specialist. And of course, the +1 forwarding, I think, speaks to himself, for itself when he needs to defeat all these side schemes. The downside with the side schemes is your Nemesis set. So, right, top center, we've got Mind Scan and Telekinetic Blast, which are parodies of your own events. They're scary as heck because for every side scheme in the victory display, they do +1, to either adding threat or dealing damage to you, respectively. They can just, wipe out the main scheme or destroy you in one go. For context, I normally have, I would say 4 to 6 side schemes in the victory display by the late game. So, late game, potentially adding 8 threat to the main scheme or dealing 8 damage to you, which is horrifying. And it can even be 7, +7, which is very, 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 very scary. So early game, these aren't too bad. They're still not great. Adding 3 threat to the main scheme can tip you over in solo quite often, but I would say taking 3 damage out of the blue can be pretty scary as well. So definitely something to watch out for. Really, really brutal. But I do think his Nemesis set is one of the most fun sets in the game. Strife is his Nemesis villain, and he blocks Sonic events for the most part and has villainous. So what that means is now your attack card, Telekinetic Blast, which we're going to cover, kind of doesn't work anymore. It will do 1 damage instead of, 6 to 12, depending on how many side schemes you've defeated, which means early game, Strife is difficult to deal with. Your attack card doesn't work against him. Plasma Rifle can deal up to 4 damage, but it takes time to charge up. So late game, Strife isn't a problem. Early game, when you're, not got any good, real sources of damage, he can be very, very tricky and really, throw a spanner in the works. I do think allies are good for Cable because he starts slow, doesn't have that much damage to begin with, he wants to keep putting his threat removal in these side schemes. So allies can kind of cover for that, and they can hit Strife. Um, and then you've got Force Field, Telekinetic Force Field. Nothing to, that important there. That's the easy card here. His side scheme is really, really unique, and this is my favorite thing about his Nemesis set. It basically works like Kang Stage 2, where Kang, you get sent into a different time. Here you're sent back to the future. Now you can only thwart the scheme, and only hit minions engaged with you, and other players can't help either. So you're really isolated in multiplayer, which is really fun, if scary. But yeah, really thematic mod set. I think everything, in terms of theme, hits really well. They're interesting, but kind of, I don't want to say too brutal, but definitely one of the harder Nemesis sets. So now we're going to get into the ranking and talk about some of Cable specific cards and how they have, um, unfolded during my personal experience playing Cable. Starting off with damage. So for damage, you have Telekinetic Blast, which I've talked about. 6 damage plus 1 per side scheme in the victory display. But it starts off very expensive, and for its cost, if I'm playing this with a hand of let's say 5 cards in hero form, I lose this card because I'm choosing to play it. I then have to spend 3, so it's 4 effective resources for 6 damage. Potentially on turn 1. And even with a couple of side schemes, it's only equaling swinging web kick, which I think is, these days, by modern standards, it's good damage, but it's quite inflexible. It's one big chunk. You're mostly going to use it on the villain or one of those, semi-rare, large, high HP minions. So yeah, and there's only 2 copies, so it's good to end games with. Once it's built up, it can do, 12 plus damage, extremely strong, but early game, very weak. Not many copies of it, not reliable in my opinion. Plasma Rifle, on the other hand, I underestimated early on, but I have ended up loving it in gameplay. This is one of my top priorities on Cable now, every single game. First game we ever played with Cable and Domino, the new heroes from Next Evolution. I got Lock and Load, the aggression side scheme out on turn 2, I think it was, defeated it, and suddenly we had guns. I had this image, he's like raiding an armory, throws a pistol, Domino catches it, and we immediately used both of our weapons to take out a minion together. It felt so awesome. It felt, really, really good. So a lot of cool experiences. Plasma Rifle, I think, is, very reliable. Starts off only doing a little bit of damage. But, by the later game, even the mid game, you're spending 1 energy to deal 4 damage, which is an incredibly efficient ratio. So yeah, I've set his damage at 3. By the late game, you could say it's even a 4 or a 5. But, starting at turn 1, probably more of a 2, 1 to 2 stars, if I'm honest, so kind of difficult to rank the overall, but I've gone for 3. I think most people will think, yeah, his damage is all right, but he can have problems with minions, especially because you're wanting to dedicate so many resources to finding, playing, and defeating side schemes. Doesn't leave you a lot of room to maneuver sometimes. If the scenario starts with, we did Expert Claw, Radioactive Man, I think he had like 7 health, was out there turn 1. That was a big problem when I was trying to set up Cable. But yeah, overall, damage is fine. Gets really good in the late game. Threat removal is really good. I could arguably, put this at 5 stars, but Mind Scan does start off weak. And you are putting a lot of that threat removal towards threat you've introduced with player side schemes. But definitely for solo, I don't think threat is a big problem for Cable. I think the issue is trying to set up quick enough and keep, everything, maybe minions and different things under control to begin with. Yeah, very happy with his threat removal. He readies when he defeats a side scheme. 3 copies of Mind Scan, which, yeah, it starts weak, gets strong. Ascani-san, and apologies, I had to take this picture. Same with the Nemesis set, because I couldn't find a good one online yet. When you defend, spend an energy, remove threat equal to your hero's thwarting. This can be really good, but I find the timing quite difficult. Personally, in 1 and 2 player, I'm playing the side scheme. I want to defeat it that turn. That is high priority for me. But, protection especially, but other aspects can like this. It can be a really good card. It is just not as consistent, and smooth in timing as I would always like, but I do like it. Up next is survivability, and he's got 12 hit points, 4 recovery. He's got this force field card, which helps him block damage, and then body slide to easily go ultra ego, recover, and still end in hero form. Very, very useful. You can even use an upcoming card, will cover under control, to manipulate the encounter deck, which can soften attacks or even stop extra attacks coming out, which is useful. Telekinetic Force Field is basically a tough card. It is overpriced for that, in my opinion, but it is very flexible because you can use it on other players, which is actually has been useful for me, and even on specific allies that you might need to keep in play because of scenario objectives, which is cool. So very cool card. I should say a lot of these cards we've looked at have had the Sonic and Superpower trait. Sonic trait is, my playstyle. I've not been so keen on Technovirus Purge to get Sonic on my hero, so team building exercise hasn't been such a great option. But I've run Def Focus quite a bit. I really like that. Don't always use Def Focus every turn, but it is quite meaningful on the cards you do use it on, and Kinetic Force Field is very useful. One of the best uses for this card is your Treachery from your Nemesis set that can just destroy you. This is a counter. If I've got my Nemesis set in the encounter deck, this card shoots up in priority. So yeah, some pretty cool stuff from Cable. He's pretty hard to take down. Soaking, attacks and maybe minion hits on his hit points is something I like to do early. I think that really helps him get space to set up and then deal with them. Yeah, really cool. Economy, I think, is actually good. I sometimes don't think it feels good to people because you've got to play all these side schemes and then try and defeat them and then deal with stuff. But Grey Malkin is kind of my top priority on Cable. Generates a resource. If I defeat a side scheme, it's generating 2. It is not capped. Cable readies up once, per phase. I should say Ascani's Son does help with readying up in the villain phase. Really like the amount of resources I get from this almost all the time. Very, very effective. And then we have Professor, which is just card draw in Alter Ego, unless you choose to search your deck and discard pile for a side scheme, which gives you so much choice and power over, what's going on, This is one of the arguments I would say for take the guards as a side scheme. If there's a minion out, grab it, put this in play, and you can use it to help. But, you can really make a decision based on what's in your hand, whether you can defeat a side scheme, whether you need short or long-term gain, about what you grab from Professor. Really, really cool choices involved with that. And together, you're getting, I'd say, more resource generation on average than, most heroes, but it's not pushing you up to that upper boundary, and it is kind of dependent on the side scheme being in play, which I haven't had a problem with, but yeah, it's, again, if you don't have Grey Malkin in play, he might feel a little bit poorer than you would like. Next up, we have Control, which I've given 2 stars. Doesn't have a ton of control. You could consider, telekinetic force field blocking all damage. Kind of, if the villain has something that triggers on dealing damage, it stops it. Control being, how I rate, stopping the villain doing what the villain wants to do. But, he doesn't have any stuns. He doesn't have any confuse. You can kind of stop the main scheme going over. Some kind of scenarios are sort of based around that happening, but really precognition is his main tool here. But it is basically global logistics, which is one of my favorite cards. Much, much better in solo play compared to 4-player. And it starts off again very weak and gets better with player side schemes in general in the victory display. Look at the encounter deck, move stuff around, discard one. You can ensure you're not going to get advanced, so you can go Alter Ego, anything like that. You can dodge your Shadow of the Past and Obligation. It is very strong. The only sort of big mark I have against this is that Cable has so much he wants to do. He wants to play his upgrades, he wants to play side schemes, defeat them, control the board. I can find this a lot harder to afford than I would like. It's one of the reasons Global Logistics, one of my favorite builds, isn't my go-to kind of with Cable solo, just because he has so much he's trying to do. But it is a very, very good card and does have some cool uses, so I hugely like this one. Next up, I'm going to cover reliability. So normally when a hero has 2 in every stat, that is the baseline for me to think they're reliable. If you play 10 games in a row, how good are they going to be, compared to one another? You're going to have some really bad games and some really good games. Are they all going to be good? Win every stat normally means you're pretty versatile and reliable. The problem is, Cable has a few issues with that. He can also grab a side scheme and as his setup ability, which is quite reliable. You can, it takes a lot of the randomness if you can guarantee which one you want turn 1. But the problem is then getting the rest of your side schemes, depending on when you find Professor or on where they sit in your deck, it can take a bit longer to get them than others. Your Obligation can really mess up your plan with Technovirus Purge. Your Shadow of the Past set is devastating. That can definitely end some games. So I think, let's say you play 10 games with Cable, I think you're going to get a mixture of experiences in each one. So score's quite low for reliability for me so far. So a little bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. And speaking of scoring low, we have his readiness. Cable doesn't start as weak as, I would say Quicksilver, but he takes a long time to build up. Uh, Depending on luck, you can build faster by defeating all these player side schemes, but even doing that, can slow you down a bit because you're putting so much into doing that. You're not doing a lot else. Uh, Again, Grey Malkin readying when you defeat a side scheme helps. Cable readying helps. But it definitely takes a while. Cable is a very slow build, which is a little bit unfortunate. I don't know if maybe his events would have benefited from starting, with +1, remove 4 threat instead of 3, but then maybe having a cap on how high they can go. I'm not quite sure. I don't know what people would prefer. I don't know what I would prefer. I've not actually tested that out, but definitely he starts a little bit slow for my liking. Not everyone can be super strong from the beginning. I definitely, don't think he should just start at full power, but it is something to consider. He does have Forced Amnesia to help get a normal side scheme into the victory display alongside the player ones or any scenario or campaign ones that have victory on them. But the problem with Forced Amnesia is sort of my problem with Precognition in that I have so much I urgently need to do on Cable all the time. Uh, Unless I see there's a normal side scheme out already and I can guarantee get it into the victory display that turn and know I'm getting a bonus. Rarely can I afford to put this into play for 2 effective resources, then wait for a side scheme to then use it. That's something I struggle to find myself able to do. But it is very cool, and you can use this card to if a side scheme has come into play that the villain will also bring into play when it changes to its final stage. You can use Forced Amnesia to lock it away in the victory display, and then when you flip the villain to their final stage, it won't come in. So it's very, very cool. The card value is interesting because late game Cable's events and Plasma Rifle, they're hitting really hard. Early game, very, very weak. I decided on 2 being the correct rating here, because he also has a few cards like Telekinetic Force Field, which I don't think the versatility quite justifies its price being 1 higher. I don't think Cable would be overpowered if it was just 1 cheaper. Temporal Leap I think is quite expensive as well. I'd rather put the money into preventing the main scheme going over than oh, it has gone over, now I'll use this. It is just really, in my opinion, good for stopping the treachery version of Mind Scan from your Nemesis set from ending the game. And some main schemes when they advance are very bad. Some of them have very low threat values, like Ultron's first scheme. So that this can be kind of good in certain situations. But, the overall value I think of his cards, especially starting off, and even in the mid game, sometimes not going to hit as hard as other heroes' stuff. But still pretty decent, and again by late game, very good. So kind of hard to rate, but hopefully this makes sense to you guys. Up next we have Ease of Play, and I think this will surprise people. I put it at 1 star. I think he's difficult. I think he's sometimes in subtle ways difficult. I don't think he looks difficult, like, oh yeah, I want to play side schemes and defeat them. But balancing how many resources you're dedicating to removing schemes, and how much you're dedicating to actually controlling the board is a very fine line to walk. I think there's a ton of decision making that goes into his opening side scheme. Again, phenomenal job. They did balancing all the different options. And again, in multiplayer, if you've got 4 different people, you're having to weigh up what your starting side scheme is based on, first of all, you get your opening hand and you're like, how is this going to interact with what I can do? Then you do your mulligan, and then how is this going to interact? You're factoring in 4, different players, including yourself, into all these decisions, then having to pick that side scheme that's going to benefit everyone the most that you can deal with, that kind of fits in with your opening there. So a lot of huge decisions there. And even with Professor going forward, trying to work out the sequencing to get the ready from Cable by defeating a side scheme himself, but also the readies on Grey Malkin and putting Grey Malkin's resource in the right place. There's a lot of interesting sequencing there that actually, I think, rivals Colossus, actually from the previous expansion, as some of the more difficult, more nuanced decision making, even if it might not look that way at a glance. I think his deck building makes a big difference as well. So it's not necessarily ease of play, but I think choosing the right deck and playing it well can add to difficulty, and he is a character where that comes into play. So actually, that is my opinion on that. There is another new character that completely smashes my scale of 1 to 5 compared to the other characters, but we'll talk about that in the next video. So yeah, but on the scale I've used for every other character, I'm putting this guy for 1 at the moment. And then we have Variety up next. And before I give a score for that, I want to talk about kind of the where I think the variety comes from with Cable and what affects it, how high and how low I'm going to put it. So, first of all, for variety for any hero, one of the things I'm looking at is how many cards am I kind of looking to put in that hero's deck, no matter what deck it is, doesn't matter what I'm trying to do in Justice. Is this card always in the deck? Um, or what about basic cards? If a few basic cards are in every single deck for that character, it makes them feel a lot more samey. So we have what I'm calling the auto includes. Now, Skilled Investigator is kind of an auto include in anyone, but particularly in Cable, I'm putting two of these in most of my Justice decks just because he is getting through so many side schemes. And I think in multiplayer, you could easily go up to 3 even in 2-player. Definitely in 3 and 4-player, you're desperate for this card. It's kind of standard practice in 3-player anyway, I would say, but it's so essential for him. Um, but it's kind of the Justice tax anyway. It almost always does that, so it is what it is. Mission Leader is a new card. Again, I had to take this picture, apologies. Um, but again, I think every single leadership deck for Cable has this, where not every single leadership deck for other characters will. Definitely in 3 and 4-player, I think it's an auto include. If you're a soldier, I think even in 2-player, most people take it. In solo, I don't know if most people would take Mission Leader, but Cable definitely does. So he's always wanting Mission Leader. And then, of course, he needs side schemes, and he's not going to always want every side scheme that has been shown, especially as we get more coming out in the future. But I think the 3 I have listed here, currently 1 to 4-player, I can't see builds where he doesn't take these. If everyone has a good weapon, meaning all the time in solo, I think Lock and Load gets added on here. Depending on your aspect, I'm thinking you have, 4 to 6 auto includes, but on the whole, that isn't too bad. So that's kind of maybe average, maybe slightly over that, but he is all about player side schemes, and they do have interesting choices. So even if you're including build support and call for backup, you're not always choosing it on turn 1, and you're not always getting the same thing from it. So actually, I don't think this affects the variety too badly. I'm going to go through a couple of the decks and things I like for him now, just to show the variety he can actually get. For Justice, I think this is the most obvious aspect. He wants to defeat side schemes. I've called this aspect the side schema, just about dealing with side schemes and things that interact with them. Turn the tide, clear the area, multitasking could all be added onto this. Here's some really cool and actually varied builds he can actually use this on, especially depending on player count. I've got a deck based around this called The Ends Justify the Means on Marvel's CDB, so I'll include the link down below if you're interested. But yeah, this is probably the most obvious build for him in the most obvious aspect, and it is very good. Another kind of way you could build him is focus more on the Mutant Education card. You can hybrid these builds and even put Mutant Education in most other aspects with your builds. But I think Justice can really lean into, 3 copies, getting down to Alter Ego safely, especially at the lower player counts, which is really cool. So you can cycle your more powerful, boosted events once you've got side schemes in the victory display to keep getting their huge value more often. I think that's very cool. Leadership, he comes with Uncanny X-Force and, these characters you see here in his precon. That build is very, very good. I like to sprinkle in a couple of upgrades. Since we don't have many X-Force allies right now in basic and leadership, I also normally throw in either Nick or Professor X or both, and Nick is good for other reasons for setting up as we talked about. But yeah, Uncanny X-Force is all about removing threat from side schemes, which is what Cable wants. I do think in solo, it's not as good. You want to make sure you're the one removing threat from the side schemes. So sometimes you have too much threat removal on your allies here that you're not going to want to use them to help you because they will just one-shot that side scheme and you won't get the ready. But in 2-player, I found this absolutely phenomenal. I can only imagine it stays really good in 3 and 4-player. I want to talk about what I'm calling single ally focus, which isn't an archetype, but it's more of a selection of archetypes that is helped by being able to focus on one ally. What you can do with Call for Backup, in addition to just getting plain value, is if your deck is built around one ally and using it really effectively, then what you're going to want to do is get that ally early. So Call for Backup can guarantee, Yondu on turn 1 to set up your Voltron. Very, very, very powerful. Maybe not Yondu. I quite often like Iron Man, but Yondu is a classic I think most people think of with Voltron builds, which is putting a lot of upgrades on one ally. Maria Hill you can guarantee on turn 1. Captain Marvel if you build it into energy, and he does have I think 5 energies in his deck, so he at least hits the average amount of energies, maybe even slightly above. I have to double check that, but you can go for especially with the new X-Force ally Sunspot who likes energies. You have some really interesting choices there. You get really expensive Captain Marvel into play turn 1. She can deal damage to the villain, stun them, then you can just rapid response your heart out, and she'll get immense value throughout the whole first deck pass, which is not always the case with builds put around her. So I really like this. Obviously, make the call, because you've got the ally you want, turn 1, make the call is online for your best ally. From the beginning, very, very strong. Up next, we have Aggression, and I've put Boot Camp here without an image of Boot Camp. You guys know what it does, 3-cost support, +1 attack to all your allies. Allies are really good for Aggression, Cable, notably in solo, because he needs help with threat removal. You're going to need that 1 threat removal to soften up a lot of those 3 threat removal side schemes to begin with. And you've got characters like Brawn and Bug that I think are very effective at that. You can have a Bug fort for 1, Cable fort for 2. Beat the side scheme, Cable readies up. He can then use his basic activation to attack, and that will heal Bug. Wolverine, great call for backup target. Can also use his 1 forwarding very effectively. And again, Grey Malkin provides the energy resource to Sunfire. Goes in most decks anyway, but he's very, very reliable here in Cables. And then we have Sonic. This is probably the riskiest build I'm endorsing here, because your Obligation and Nemesis set can shut this down hugely. But Psychic Assault is very strong, gives you that Confuse, Power of the Mind can pay for it. Psylocke, you might include anyway in most decks, but here in particular, again, Power of the Mind will help you play her. Also a good target for, call for backup. Professor X speaks for himself. And, there's a lot of synergy in the art here with these allies, which I don't think is a coincidence. Very strong build, but super risky with the Obligation and Nemesis set. So a little bit riskier than I like, but it is very good and fun if you can avoid those things for the most part. Up next, we have Protection, which I love Repurposed. If you know anything about me, it was always going to be here, but I think it is good for him. His Plasma Rifle is tech. Obviously, it's a good card. You're probably only repurposing it on the final turn to get the win, or in an emergency, but it's still very relevant. But also you get that ready on Cable. So in solo, you can do things like attack, repurpose an energy barrier or something, ready and attack again. Then you can maybe play Mind Scan from your hand to defeat a side scheme. Then you ready up and get to attack again with that boosted repurpose. Switch over to multiplayer, you can actually use repurpose to try and boost your stats up to defeat side schemes. But I don't really think this competes with Justice in terms of that. It does give you flexibility to pivot more into burst damage if you need to in multiplayer. But very fun regardless. One of my favorite ways I played in Protection so far. Honestly, he's not been out that long. One of the only ways I played him in Protection so far, but very good. One of the other ways I've been playing him is what I call the Generalist, or the no archetype, where you're just taking solid cards that really support your game plan. I don't think you use Multiple Man and Black Widow and Starhawk in the same deck. Multiple Man, I don't think you run with the bottom 2 here, but I wanted to talk about all of them. Getting Multiple Man on turn 1 with call for backup is insanely good, and if you draw Multiple Man in your opening hand, you just play him instead of getting call for backup. So it's a really easy way to adapt to different situations. And with 1 threat removal on each of them, they can easily soften up a few player side schemes, and they keep your defense covered for the early game. Very strong. They can help pop toughs, deal with any starting minions. So I really like Multiple Man for an opening. More than, say, Iron Fist, although I would consider Iron Fist with call for backup later in the game, or if I was running instead Starhawk and Black Widow. These characters take ally slots for a long time, so they don't really, they're not compatible with Multiple Man in my experience. And again, Multiple Man is even better here because you don't have a signature ally already in your deck. So there's no special ally you're really trying to get out into play. So there's more room for him. But yeah, Starhawk, 1 threat removal, can pivot into damage, can, go between them if you want to recycle him faster. Really good for helping with side schemes in solo. Black Widow, good at helping you avoid your Obligation and Nemesis coming into play. But she's a bit slow, where I think Cable kind of wants, a good amount of tempo. Hard Knocks, again, can help with that lack of damage in the early game. So interesting stuff there, really like it. Overall, I don't think this will surprise people. I think Justice is best for him. But Leadership is surprisingly close. And especially, I would say, in 2-player, more than solo, as I've found. But yeah, both Justice and Leadership, really, really good. Aggression and Protection, I think, are better for him. Again, I haven't had practical 3 and 4-player experience, but I think taking Cable in those aspects is going to make you extremely reliant on your other players putting your side teams for you to power you up. You will have some means to do it, but I don't think it's going to be that consistent. So if you're really coordinated with other players and they're willing to help power up and focus on those side schemes, you're going to be potentially bringing or they'll be bringing, which will benefit you. You'll have a better time, but otherwise, I'm thinking aggression and protection are going to be better off in solo play um, rather than multiplayer. But all very good and viable, so that's good. Honorable mentions are a few other archetypes which I like, but I don't think quite as good as the others. But I wanted to showcase the variety. Web Warrior is honestly kind of on par with the others. I would say more Injustice because you're going to need some extra threat removal to try and get Web of Death and Destiny in play turn 1, but you can't rely on your Web Warrior allies really on turn 1. So you can use build support to get Web of Life and Destiny in play straight away, and then you've got all your Web Warrior shenanigans going on. Tons of card draw is probably the main benefit here, and card draw is very good. So I really actually like Web Warriors, mostly Injustice, but you can go Leadership or Protection, no problem. Shield, I really like. I like Global Logistics to dodge the Obligation and Nemesis set, but part of the problem I have is it's a little bit of a slow build. So yeah, I could play Surveillance Team, but I could just play an ally, which basically will be almost as good and more flexible. Monica Cheng is very, very good, but I don't think she's worth call for backups use over a 4 cost. I'm normally looking at Dazzler or Nick Fury, Professor X. I think they're all very good options. In solo, I think Venom's actually potentially an option. So yeah, I just don't think Shield's quite fast enough. If you start to look into Homeland Intervention and need multiple pieces out, Cable is slow, Shield is slow, but I still think it's good. I definitely think a Finn just to build with Global Logistics is still very good. Just I don't quite like it as much as the others personally. Push Ahead is good for getting Technovirus out of play. You can get big stats with Technovirus out of play, but it's still expensive because it exhausts you. Even if Technovirus is in the victory display, you have 3 in each stat. I could fort for free, and this will exhaust me anyway. So really what Push Ahead is paying for, and it needs a mental resource on top of that as a restriction, but really you're paying 4 effective resources to turn 3 defense and 3 attack into 6 threat removal. Pretty expensive, but still fun. Very satisfying build for him. Rush, I think, is surprisingly good. Turn 1, you grab Lock and Load, you fort it, and this is solo. You immediately get a hand cannon. Now you can attack the villain for 4 with Overkill, and then you've still got 6 cards in hand to deal damage to the villain after dealing 4 damage and securing an extra 2 damage on the next 2 turns, and that Overkill on the next 2 turns if Guard comes in. So it can really smooth out some problems Rush has with that, by guaranteeing Overkill on turn 1. And I think that's kind of underrated. I don't think the rest of his cards are very good for Rush. I think I would normally go up to 50 cards here, introducing a lot of damage cards. But I thought it's a very interesting avenue. If you are one of those players that likes to rush, he does have a build which can, kind of start to do that. Last up, we have Perfect Defense, which I think will become better. I think the card coming with Angels Pack officially previewed is Containment Strategy, which is something you attach to a side scheme, and when you defend, it removes threat from that side scheme. So I actually think that will help protection in multiplayer. But until then, I'm a little bit, on edge with that. I think the problem with Perfect Defense in solo and currently, especially, is it's slow and passive. Cable is slow. So I think committing to defending and getting benefits from that is not really what I'm looking to do with him. I'm wanting to make sure I've got some way to deal with the board while I'm getting through these side schemes. But it is interesting, and with Technovirus Purge, he can get very high defense stat. So for variety, the other thing I think to take into account here is even though he has all these different builds, you're always hunting this player side schemes. The builds play differently, but still you want these side schemes, you want them in the victory display. So the variety is only going to go so far. Your game plan is largely going to be the same. It's just a different way you achieve that game plan. So still a lot of variety, but I think, it is still very reliant on the same overall plan, same goal at the end of the day, which is fine. I don't have a problem with it, but I can see people who don't like player side schemes are not going to like Cable because there's no real alternative way to play. I do think, again, that opening side scheme and using Professor has so many cool options. Every game is going to unfold differently. You can take the same deck, get a different start, and that will have kind of a cascading effect on how the game plays out. So yeah, I actually like the variety quite a lot here. This is more for fun, which we'll cover soon, but I thought I'd include it on this screen here. I think something that's going to affect how much you enjoy Cable is going to be reliant on your other players. If everyone just, builds their own deck, freeform deck building, just pick whatever character you want, do whatever, and then we'll bring them together in multiplayer. If that's how you guys, come together in multiplayer, you're not going to have as good of a time as if you say, hey, I'm playing Cable, maybe build your decks with that in mind. Bring an expensive ally, because I've got Call for Backup. Make sure you've got something to help me with threat removal. Make sure you've got an effective, support and upgrade on your hero, because of, superpower training and build support. So yeah, careful coordination is going to elevate Cable in multiplayer, where he's going to be an extremely good support hero to ensure he can help players get the cards they need. The starting side scheme in multiplayer is going to be huge. If you can guarantee Ant-Man can get his helmet on turn 1, devastating. And there's, Iron Will on Colossus, Dwight-Feet, probably saying that wrong, Dwight-Feet Mastery on Drax. Really, 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 really powerful. So coordinating with Cable is going to elevate him. But yeah, so for variety, I'm putting him at 3 stars. It's the focusing on side schemes and mostly taking several of the best ones in most builds. I definitely think brings it down a little bit, but very, very many options otherwise and around those, which I think is really cool. So variety is hitting 3 for me, which I think is pretty good. I think it's a high 3. I think it's almost 4. So I like the variety. I don't think it's going to rival anything like Nova, but still excellent. Then we have the fun factor, which this will probably surprise people, but I'm putting it at 5 stars. I love the mini game of trying to defeat these side schemes and then, ready, get the most value out of Grey Malkin. There's a lot of cool sequencing things and a lot of cool decision making, and it's not overwhelming, but it is very in-depth, which I really like. And I think it's very satisfying to get these readies. You have to earn them. You have to find the threat removal from Cable, not allies or other players. I think that's really cool. I think the side schemes being framed as missions is very thematic. That does add to the fun, in my opinion. Body slide just feels, you're breaking the rules. You get to go ultra ego and bring people with you, or vice versa, going back down. I think that's really cool. So I have a lot of fun with Cable. He's gripped me more than most heroes have, if I'm honest with you. I don't know if he's going to end up in my top 10 long term. There's probably some recency bias. I will see where he lands in the future. But, I can't remember another hero in an expansion box that I was enjoying this much as Cable for a very long time. Definitely some good heroes in this box. So yeah, that is where I stand on Cable. Overall, I'm going to rate him in the B tier for power. That is... he's not been out that long. This is not a definitive, this is how all his stats actually are. This is how his power looks. But so far, this is what I am finding. I think it's on the sort of middle to lower end of B tier, which I rated in my last video as excellent. Not extremely good, but, very good still. I think his stats are not quite what you'd be looking at in terms of how I've rated them here. But I think there's extra value in completing these side schemes and the synergies going on with that. But the main thing holding him back is how slow he is to build up. It is just a little bit painful sometimes, but for me, it's an enjoyable puzzle. I think deck building for tempo really can offset some of that. So yeah, I could see him maybe after things settle down and I've got, an even better impression. He could drop down into C tier, or he could move up to the higher side of B. I'm struggling to see him going up to A, and I don't think he'll go down to D by any means. He's got too much threat removal. Yeah, that's roughly how I'm pegging him to be. Very well balanced character. So that's going to bring us to our conclusion. I really like him. I think the playstyle around these side schemes, focusing on them, is really fun. He has tons of decision making. And I don't, I'm not a big comics guy, but I think he's really thematic. He's a soldier from the future. He's going on the missions. Cool. I love it. I think that's really good. Plasma rifle. Multiple ways to get that in play early. 2 side schemes which find it. Professor which can find the side schemes. You could just find plasma rifle. So you're getting your weapon out. Definitely feels, quite soldier-like. I really enjoy that. Definitely think he's got good deck variety, even if you've still got the same, game plan all the time. Unlike, you don't have that with, say, Captain America. But, that's a high bar to reach. But again, you're really set on these side schemes. Kind of like Ironheart is set on progress counters kind of thing. You're always going for that. But your deck plays more of a it plays more of an impact. And also, because your event starts so weak, you do tend to play more aspect cards compared to signature cards than a lot of heroes, which I think does add to, the variety of experience you're going to get. You're going to be wanting to play a bigger, spread of cards, all the time. And again, I think being well balanced is a pro. There are benefits to having stronger characters. They're good for new players. They're good for difficult scenarios that you might otherwise find frustrating. Definitely, I think that's relevant. And even with a well-balanced character, some scenarios are going to be a bit of a problem. Still fine, but maybe a little bit frustrating depending on how you enjoy the game. Some scenarios are going to be maybe a little bit too easy. It's still almost a guaranteed win. Outside of some freak Shadow of the Past. But what I like by finding a character who kind of falls, roughly around the middle, is almost every scenario is offering the right level of challenge, and to me that is huge. Because a lot of the reasons, a lot of the arguments people have, oh, if the character's too strong, just put them against a stronger enemy. But what if you're in multiplayer? What if not everyone wants to play a really strong character? Cable can play well with anyone. I don't think he's holding a team back in multiplayer, but neither is he going to carry it. He's not going to be too dominating or too weak. I think it's a really, really good spot for him to be in, actually, which pleasantly surprised me. Of all the X-Force that I rated in my Reddit deep dive series, I rated him actually the lowest. I rated him to be 16th best, which I don't think is actually the case. I think it's less. But a lot of people were saying he was guaranteed S tier because of the uncapped scaling on his events, with the side schemes. But the side schemes gathering in the victory display is just too slow for that to ever really be a reality, in my opinion. So yeah, pretty interesting how that's fallen. Downsides is, I think, splitting your attention between side schemes and managing the board is unusual. I think that can frustrate some people. Also how slow he is to build. Some people are going to find him just a little bit unimpactful, which is fine. People like different things, but that is just something I think I've already kind of seen feedback coming in from people toward that end. Again, I put slow to power up, kind of ties into his playstyle, but I think it's separate. It's a hero is less fun if you're only really being effective in the last, third of the game. I don't think that is true for Cable, and I really like his early game plan and how you have to, make nuanced decisions around what you prioritize, but that's still a relevant factor. And in multiplayer, even in two-player as Justice, I was sometimes kind of, looking to my other player and being like, hey, can you help me for this? What have you got, that I, anything I can lean on here to help me get this extra side scheme defeated. I can only imagine in 3 and 4 player, though yes, you will probably build more, be more dedicated purely to threat removal there. You're still going to have other players help you. Depending on your play group, they might not want to. Some people will play protection and they're like, I'm going to only defend. This is my job. This is what I'm here for. Other players are going to be a bit more flexible, and that will also come down to deck building and character choice. So definitely could factor in there to some people's enjoyment of him. And the other thing is, with his special deck building bonus to include side schemes from other aspects, I think we have a bit of a Cyclops situation here, where he's going to like to take side schemes from other aspects, and maybe multiple side schemes, which is going to mean other players can't really have them so much. Now, other players could have them, but that's going to limit his choices with Professor, and limit his opening choice in the setup. And other players might not prioritize them quite like he does, so depending on your coordination, letting other players have them might end up hurting how fast you're going to be able to build with Cable. So definitely some interesting considerations, but overall, I think the cons are on the minor side, and can be offset depending on they're very person and player group specific, and I guess some of the pros are as well, but that's how he falls for me. More on the pro side. Huge fan of Cable. Hope you guys like him too, and I hope you guys appreciated this review. Again, expansion's not been out too long. I'm not saying this is definitively how he is, but this is my experience. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. If you want to see more, definitely hit that subscribe button. Domino's review coming up next. And yeah, have a good day. Bye.